Welcome to Legend Lore 24. Discover the mysterious myths of mythology, meet powerful gods and heroes through vivid stories. Hit subscribe and the notification bell so you don't miss any exciting videos. Start your mythological journey now.
In the beginning, there was nothing. Then a land called Filheim, the land of fog, emerged, filling half the universe. The other half was occupied by Muspelheim, where the air burned with fire. Where these two realms met was the great void, Ginnungagap. In this void, a peaceful river flowed and began to freeze, forming layers of ice. A heat from Muspelheim warmed the cold of Filheim, and this energy gave birth to Ymir, the great frost giant and the first of all the frost giants. Muspelheim was protected by a flame giant named Surtur, who wielded a great flaming sword. When Ragnarok came, it was Surtur who would lead the fire giants out of their land. Meanwhile, in Filheim, Ymir grew larger as the sparks from Surtur's sword caused the ice to melt. Life began to emerge in the form of a cow named Idhuma, the nourisher. Her milk flowed into 4 rivers, which Ymir drank. Idhuma was so immense that her legs supported the corners of space itself. She licked the salt from the ice, and after 3 days, the first god, Beri, appeared. Beri had a son named Bor. When the gods and giants met, an eternal battle began, one that continues to this day. Bor eventually married Bestla, a scientist, and they had 3 sons, Billy, Ve, and Odin. With these new gods, Bor was able to defeat Ymir, the source of all giants. When Ymir died, a massive flood of his blood covered the earth and all the evil beings on it. Odin and his brothers shaped the world from Ymir's body, creating the sky from his skull and appointing 4 dwarves, Nordi, Suduri, Ulsthuri, and Westeri, to hold up the 4 points of the sky. Ymir's hair became trees and bushes, his brow turned into walls to protect the gods from the giants, and in the center of these walls was Midgard, where humans would eventually live. After the flood, most giants perished. However, 2 giants, Gilmir and his wife, survived and found refuge at the edge of the world. They founded Jotunheim, the realm of the giants, and there they created a new race of giants. Odin and his brothers continued their work, creating clouds, stars, and seasons from Ymir's corpse. They took the brightest stars, combined them to form the sun and moon, and sent them out in golden chariots pulled by magnificent white horses. With Midgard now complete, Odin was crowned king of the gods. His brothers were renamed Hönir and Loki, and the trio wandered the empty earth until they found 2 pieces of driftwood on the shore. Hönir reached the first piece, and his shadow gave it arms and legs. Loki did the same for the second piece. Odin then breathed divine life into the first piece, creating the first woman, and from the second piece came the first man. Odin gave life to the first humans, while Loki endowed them with the senses and consciousness. Hönir gave them the power of speech. Odin named the man Ash and the woman Elm, and all humans are descended from these first 2. After creating humans, Odin established the realm of the gods, called Asgard. It was perfect, with endless golden palaces and shining with the light of 1,000 suns. The gods built the Bifrost, a massive rainbow bridge connecting Asgard to Midgard. Asgard was home to the Aesir gods, but they were not alone. The Vanir gods lived in their realm, Vanaheim. Tensions between the 2 families grew into war, which ended with a truce. Hostages were exchanged, the Vanir gods Njord, Frey, and Freya went to live in Asgard, while Hönir went to Vanaheim. All realms, Asgard, Vanaheim, Midgard, and Odinheim, were bound together by the world tree Yggdrasil. Its branches stretched over the 9 worlds, and its roots reached into the edges of existence. The roots were managed by the Norns, the 3 fate-weaving sisters. One root led to Asgard, drawing strength from the Well of Weird, another led to Odinheim, drawing wisdom from the Well of Mimir, and the third led to Filheim, where the Well of Veldrumr, filled with black, poisonous water, was slowly destroying the root. At the base of this root, a dragon named Nidhogg sat and attacked it. The signs of decay were already evident, and Ragnarok was on its way. In the 9 realms, Odin wields ultimate power but refuses to accept that Ragnarok is inevitable. His refusal to confront his fate drives him to the edges of the world tree, where he seeks knowledge and power. One notable tale is of Odin's quest to uncover the secrets of the runes. With this arcane knowledge, he could perform mighty acts of magic. However, to obtain such knowledge, a horrific sacrifice was required. Odin hung himself from the world tree, suspended by his neck for 9 long days. During this time, he swung in the dark, freezing winds, hanging above existence itself. It is said that the usually fearless Odin screamed in terror and pain, his cries echoing throughout all the 9 realms. When his ordeal ended, Odin emerged as the master of the magical runes. His willingness to make any sacrifice for victory in Ragnarok proved that his trials were far from over. Despite not being a physically strong man, Odin possessed something even more valuable: wisdom. While sitting on his throne in Asgard, he was accompanied by 2 ravens named Thought and Memory, who brought him news from across the universe. From the dawn of time, Odin prepared for Ragnarok, knowing he would need the greatest warriors by his side. To that end, he built Valhalla, his grandest palace. Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain, was constructed with walls of glittering spears polished to shine like the brightest silver. The great hall featured 500 massive wooden doors, each wide enough to allow 800 warriors to pass through. Inside, enormous banquet tables hosted nightly feasts for the favored fighters, who dined on a boar that was killed and reborn each day. After their meals, the chosen warriors would train for the apocalypse, their injuries healed instantly by Odin's enchantments. Odin's wife, Freyja, known as the Mother Goddess, stood by his side and watched over the 9 realms. While Freyja had a kind heart, even the gods had their dark sides. She took pride in her appearance and was usually content with the jewels and gifts Odin gave her. However, one day in Asgard, she saw a golden ornament attached to a statue of her husband. Overcome with greed, Freyja stole the necklace and gave it to the dwarves, asking them to create the finest necklace ever seen. When the necklace was completed, it was indeed the most beautiful piece of jewelry ever made. When Odin discovered the theft, he flew into a rage. He summoned all the dwarves involved and demanded to know who had stolen the necklace. The dwarves, loyal to Freyja above their own lives, remained silent. Odin's ward eventually discovered the true thief and began to craft runes to make the statue reveal the culprit. Fearing Odin's wrath, Freyja sought help from her favorite servant, pleading for protection. Hours later, the servant returned with a hideous and ugly dwarf who promised to keep the secret safe if Freyja would smile upon him. The next morning, Odin awoke to find the guards around the statue asleep and the statue itself shattered into pieces. Furious, Odin left Asgard in protest, taking all his enchantments with him. Without Odin, the perfect realm of the gods and the surrounding realms began to freeze. Frost giants invaded Midgard, covering the land with ice and snow. Herds, cattle, and men perished as the wind and snow howled in Odin's absence. For 7 long months, Asgard and the realms stood frozen, and hope dwindled. Only then did Odin return. Seeing the devastation caused by his absence, he forgave the thief and his wife, and began to bless the 9 realms once more. The frost giants retreated, and the world warmed. Odin showered Freyja with loving gifts, and she resumed her place by his side as the queen of the gods. Only then did Odin return. When he saw the damage that had been done in his absence, he forgave the thief and his wife and began to bless the 9 realms once more. The frost giants retreated, and peace returned. He showered Freyja with loving gifts, and she once again took her place by his side as queen of the gods. Freyja and Odin had several children. Their eldest son was the god known as Thor. Thor often traveled to the edges of the kingdoms with a sheet of lightning in his hand, endlessly fighting trolls and giants. His wife was a goddess named Sif, who held dominion over all the fields of the earth. The second son of Odin and Freyja was named Baldur, who was beloved by all. Baldur was the epitome of light, while his blind younger brother Hoda was the representative of darkness. The final son of Odin was the most courageous and bravest of all the gods, the god of war and honor named Tyr. Asgard was filled with many other gods, but for now, only two are important to know, Heimdall and Loki. Heimdall watched over the Bifrost Bridge, always on guard for the sound of an enemy approaching. He was the most loyal of all the gods. And Loki, well, Loki was the personification of trickery, deceit, and mischief. In the unchanging, perfect realm of Asgard, Loki was the flaw. He began with harmless tricks, but by the end of his story, his acts would become more and more evil until he committed an unforgivable sin. Odin had learned the secrets of the runes and prepared Valhalla to gather the courageous fallen to his side. He knew, however, that this was still not enough to win when Ragnarok came. So when his ravens told him of a certain well that gave the drinker wisdom, he knew he needed to drink from it. One night, Odin took up his cloak and staff and followed the route of Yggdrasil until he reached Mimir's secret well. Mimir was a giant after all, and it was not right that a giant should be wiser than the All-Father. "Good day, Mimir. I have come for a drink from your well," Odin said. Mimir refused him. No one would drink from the well of wisdom without paying the price. Odin, in turn, promised to pay him whatever he wished. Mimir's eyes gleamed. He knew that the gods were the eternal enemies of the giants, so he demanded the highest price he could think of. Odin could drink from the well, but he would have to leave behind one of his eyes. Odin hesitated, but as he looked at the well, his decision was made. Mimir filled the horn from the well of wisdom and handed it to the god. "Drink then. Drink and grow wise. This hour is the beginning of trouble between your race and mine." Upon drinking, Odin became wiser than anyone in the 9 realms, aside from Mimir himself. Then, true to his word, he gouged out his own eye and left it in the well. Odin would stop at nothing to prevent Ragnarok, and soon his sacrifices would not be contained to his own body. Kvasir was the world's first poet, so wise that no one could ask him a question to which he did not know the answer. This was because he was created by both the Aesir and Vanir gods, formed as a symbol of their unity after their mighty war for control of the universe. He would travel the length and breadth of the entire world, bringing wisdom and joy to everyone he crossed. It is said that every poet or skald alive today has a drop of Kvasir's blood in them, such was his wisdom. One day, Kvasir was invited to dinner by 2 devious dwarves, and while he was there, they asked him to come into a corner where they could ask him a question. When Kvasir walked over, they killed him on the spot. The dwarves were envious of his powers and had heard a rumor that his blood was more valuable than gold, so they mixed his blood with honey, turning it into a magical drink. Whoever drank Kvasir's blood would become as wise as he was and be able to speak in the most eloquent of poems. Truly, this was a priceless treasure. The dwarves, however, were not finished. Next, they invited a giant named Gilling to come out to sea with them, and of course, when they were far from shore, they drowned the giant who could not swim. When they told his wife of the accident that had occurred, her cries were so annoying to the dwarves that they killed her too. Finally, the giant's son, Suttung, was so enraged that he found the dwarves and carried them both to a cliff, saying that they would die as his father had. The dwarves cried and begged for mercy, finally promising that if he let them go, they would give him the mead made from Kvasir's blood. Suttung agreed, and so he took control of the kettles of mead, telling his daughter to make sure no one could steal or drink from them. One day, in a field owned by Bogi, Suttung's brother, an old man approached the servants who were toiling away. "Your scythes are dull. Shall I whet them for you?" The servants gladly agreed, and when the job was done, they began to argue over who could buy the whetstone from the man. "Let him have it who catches it." The men fought viciously for the stone, and when the fighting was over, every one of them was dead. Now, the old man walked quickly towards the home where Bogi lived. When Bogi's son came home, complaining that there was no one in his fields, the old man offered to do the work of all 9 men in exchange for a price. "What is the price which you ask?" Bogi inquired. I ask that you get for me a drink of Sutung's mead, the old man replied. Bogi knew that this old man must be a god, so he desperately wanted him to work his fields, but he knew the mead was not his to give away. At last, however, they made a deal, and all summer, the god worked the fields. When winter came, Bogi brought him to Sutung's home and a cave deep in the mountains. When they arrived, however, Sutung refused to spare even a drop of his mead to a god, the enemies of the giants. So the god concluded that he and Bogi must get the mead by force. Bogi surprisingly agreed to help him, and the god gave him a drill to make a hole in the wall so they could break through. Bogi drilled, and after making a hole that was nowhere near large enough to travel through, declared that the hole was done. The god asked him sternly to drill a deeper hole. This time, when Bogi was done drilling, it was still too small. But the god declared that the hole was complete, transformed himself into a snake, and slithered right through. Bogi jabbed the drill in anger at the hole, where he had tried to trick the god by drilling it too small. The god slithered into the cave where Sutung's daughter was protecting the mead and proceeded to use all his charms on the woman. She fell for him and agreed to his deal. He would sleep with her for 3 nights, and she would give him 3 drinks of the mead in exchange. She knew she was betraying her father, but the god's charms overcame her feelings of loyalty. Once the 3 nights were over, the god, who was of course Odin in disguise, drank all of the mead in 3 enormous gulps, transformed into an eagle, and returned to Asgard. He then proceeded to throw up the mead into several vats, so he could bless future poets with the power of Kvasir's blood. During this process, several drops of the mead fell to Midgard, and from these came all the mediocre poets and artists of the world. Kvasir's mead was a valuable treasure, but it would not be the last one that the gods obtained. Sif, Thor's wife, had sparkling golden hair that was envied by all who saw it. One day, the trickster god Loki decided to cut off her hair for no other reason than to cause trouble. When Thor found out what Loki had done, he flew into a rage, seizing Loki by the throat and promising to break every bone in his body. Loki begged and pleaded with the god of thunder, who finally agreed to release him on the condition that he would have the dwarves forge for Sif new hair made of real gold. Loki met with a master craftsman named Ivaldi and had the golden hair forged, along with a magnificent ship which was so big it could carry all the gods, yet so small it could be folded up to fit into a bag. On top of the ship and the hair, Ivaldi and his sons also created Odin's spear, Gungnir, which never failed to hit its mark after being thrown. Loki still could not suppress his desire for mischief, however, and before he left, he went to a rival dwarf named Brokkr and bet him his own head that he could not make an item better than the ones that Ivaldi had made. When Brokkr went to create his items, however, Loki repeatedly turned into a fly and bit the craftsman, causing several defects. When Loki and Brokkr arrived in Asgard, the gods had them present the items they had created. First came the hair, the ship, and the spear from Loki. After them came Brokkr's creations. First was a magical ring called Draupnir for Odin. Second, a magical metal boar for Frey, and thirdly, a hammer for Thor. Like Odin's spear, Thor's hammer once thrown would always find its mark. Unfortunately, because he had been bitten by a fly while creating it, the handle was shorter than usual. Despite this, the gods declared that the hammer was the greatest treasure of them all, and that Brokkr had won his bet and was entitled to Loki's head. Loki protested and begged, but Brokkr was unrelenting. When Loki attempted to run, Thor caught him and returned him to the dwarf. Finally, Loki found a way out. "I promised you my head but not my neck." So it was that Brokkr sewed Loki's lips together, preventing him from any further mischief. Loki had many different children. Sometimes he was the father, and at other times, he was the mother. For instance, he gave birth to Odin's 8-legged horse, Sleipnir, but let's not delve into that now. With the giantess Angrboda, Loki had 3 children. The first was named Hel, a goddess destined to rule the underworld and all the dead within it. The second was Jormungandr, the giant serpent who encircled all of Midgard, the world of men. The third was Fenrir, a ravenous and loyal wolf who would continue to grow immensely. As Loki's 3 children grew up in Jotunheim, Odin ordered that all 3 be brought before him. Upon seeing how large they had grown, he was filled with fear. He immediately banished Hel to the underworld and threw Jormungandr into the ocean. Fenrir, however, posed a unique problem. The wolf was so large that Odin and the gods decided they must raise him in Asgard, where they could keep a close watch on him. Of all the Aesir, only Tyr, the god of honorable combat, was brave enough to approach the giant wolf to feed him. Despite being a child of Loki and raised in Jotunheim, Fenrir was loyal to the gods and trusted them without question. Eventually, the gods decided they could not allow the wolf to grow any larger and planned to deal with the beast for good. They presented Fenrir with a chain and told him they would tie him to a post and let him break free to demonstrate his strength. The wolf eagerly agreed and snapped the chain without effort. Fearful, the gods had a second, stronger chain forged and presented it to the wolf. This time, Fenrir became suspicious but was still eager to prove his strength. After much struggle, he triumphantly broke free, howling in victory. The gods were now deeply worried, as their suspicions about Fenrir's strength were confirmed. They sent a messenger to the dwarves, requesting they construct an unbreakable chain. The result was Gleipnir, a feather-like cord made from impossible ingredients, the sound of a cat's footsteps, a woman's beard, the roots of a mountain, a bear's sinews, a fish's breath, and a bird's spit. The gods took Fenrir to a remote island in the middle of a lake in Midgard and presented him with this third chain, a thin silk cord that was nearly invisible. Fenrir suspected trickery but did not want to be called a coward. He agreed to be chained, but only if one of the gods placed their hand in his mouth as a pledge against deceit. The Asgardians avoided his gaze, except for Tyr, who bravely placed his hand inside the beast's mouth, feeling the razor-sharp teeth against his wrist. Gleipnir was tied around Fenrir, and the more he struggled, the tighter the bonds became. Unable to break free, the gods laughed in relief, except for Tyr, who lost his hand to Fenrir's bite in anger. Fenrir howled and struggled against his imprisonment for eons, with no hope of escape until Ragnarok. The gods had dealt with Fenrir, but Thor now intended to deal with another of Loki's children. As the protector of Asgard, Thor often traveled to Jotunheim to battle the giants. However, sometimes he went there to seek the aid of certain giants. In such cases, he traveled in disguise to avoid recognition. One day, after Fenrir's chaining, Thor journeyed to Jotunheim to confront Jormungandr, the massive serpent encircling the realm. Disguised, he arrived at the house of the giant Hymir, who lived on a rugged coast. Thor offered to help Hymir with his fishing, insisting he could row further and stay out longer. Hymir laughed, seeing Thor disguised as a young man from Midgard, but agreed. Thor took the head of an ox for bait, grabbed the oars, and began to row, startling Hymir with his speed. "That's enough rowing, we've reached my usual spot," Hymir said, but Thor kept rowing until they neared the serpent's dwelling. Hymir protested, fearing they would encounter Jormungandr. Thor finally set down the oars, cast his line with the ox's head, and waited. A faint rumble grew louder and closer until Jormungandr's massive head rose from the waves, its eyes burning as it gazed upon Thor. The serpent spat venom, but Thor dodged and prepared to strike with his hammer. However, it was prophesied that neither could kill the other until Ragnarok. Hymir, trembling with fear, cut the line, allowing Jormungandr to escape. Enraged, Thor knocked Hymir overboard and swam back to shore, determined to kill the serpent when Ragnarok arrived. Thor's quest failed this time, but on another visit to Jotunheim, he was lured in by Loki. Freya owned a set of wings that allowed the wearer to transform into a hawk, which Loki stole. He flew to Jotunheim and landed at the hall of the giant Geirrid. Geirrid spotted the hawk and ordered his men to capture it. Loki, taunting them, was eventually caught. Suspecting the hawk was more than it seemed, Geirrid locked Loki in a trunk for 3 months. When released, Loki, desperate, told the truth and begged for his life. Geirrid made a deal: he would spare Loki if he convinced Thor to come to his hall without his hammer. Loki agreed and returned to Asgard to persuade Thor. On their way to Geirrid's hall, Thor and Loki stayed with the giantess Grid, who, hearing their destination, gave Thor a metal rod and iron gloves. At Geirrid's hall, Thor was led to a barn with a single chair. As he sat, the chair rocketed towards the ceiling, but Thor, using Grid's rod, pushed back, breaking the backs of Geirrid's daughters who were lifting it. In the hall, Geirrid challenged Thor to a wrestling match. The fight was fierce, and Geirrid threw hot tongs at Thor, who caught them with his iron gloves and hurled them back, killing Geirrid. In one myth, Loki helped Thor, but in the next, he helped Odin steal from his own wife. Freya discovered a tunnel leading to dwarven forges where a golden necklace was being made. Desiring the necklace, she offered the dwarves gold, silver, and treasure, but they refused. Finally, she agreed to spend one night with each dwarf to obtain it. Returning to Asgard, she wore the necklace proudly until Loki discovered the truth and informed Odin. Odin commanded Loki to steal it. Loki transformed into a fly, entered Freya's chamber, bit her neck to make her turn, and stole the necklace. Freya demanded its return, and Odin agreed only if she caused a war to bring many heroes to Valhalla. Freya complied, and the necklace was returned. In another tale, Odin was nearly exiled. The gods commissioned a golden statue of Odin, but Freya, envious, had it melted down to make jewelry. Enraged, Odin executed the smiths and cast spells over the rebuilt statue. Freya, disgraced, seduced a servant to destroy the statue again. The gods, seeing Odin's inability to prevent this, banished him. Odin traveled the branches and roots of Yggdrasil until he learned that his brothers Vili and Ve had taken his throne and shared Freya. He returned, deposed his brothers, and reclaimed his position. While Odin was in exile, Frey sat on his throne, viewing the cosmos. He saw a beautiful giantess in Jotunheim and fell in love. Unable to eat or sleep, he confided in his servant Skirnir, who offered to win her hand. Skirnir rode to Jotunheim, offering Frey's treasures to the giantess Gerd, who refused until Skirnir threatened her with a curse. Gerd agreed to marry Frey after 9 nights, and they were wed. In these myths, the gods and their actions intertwine in a web of deceit, desire, and destiny, shaping the fate of the 9 realms. From here, the story takes a darker turn. The greatest of the giants, known for his formidable strength and skill, one day spotted a lone rider approaching his home. The rider's golden helmet shone like 1,000 suns as his 8-legged horse galloped effortlessly through the air and across the water. Intrigued, the giant asked the rider about his magnificent steed. However, the visitor did not answer and instead challenged the giant to a wager. "I would wager my head that no horse in all of Jotunheim is finer than mine," the stranger declared. This peculiar wager of heads seemed to be a common practice among the Norse gods. Insulted, the giant retorted that the stranger's horse was no match for his own. The two then raced furiously across the tundras and glaciers of Jotunheim, each pushing their steed to its limits. They continued racing until the terrain transformed from icy fields and valleys to the gates of Asgard. So absorbed in the race were they that they did not notice they had crossed into the realm of the gods. Upon arriving in Asgard, the giant, stunned by the splendor of the homeland of the gods, was invited inside by his rival, who was none other than Odin. The giant, now boastful and arrogant, demanded all of Thor's drinking horns be brought to him. Drinking from them all, he threatened to tear Asgard apart and cast it into the ocean, sparing only Valhalla, Freya, and Sif, whom he intended to take back to Jotunheim as his own. He further vowed to kill all other deities and drink all their ale. When Thor arrived and saw the giant drinking his ale and threatening his family, he drew his hammer and charged. The giant protested, claiming he was under Odin's protection as a guest. Thor glared at the giant, warning, "You dog of a giant, you will soon regret ever accepting that invitation." The giant proposed a duel, suggesting they fight in single combat after he had time to prepare properly. Thor agreed. By the time the giant returned to Jotunheim, word of the duel had spread far and wide, with the stakes being nothing less than the life of either the giant's greatest warrior or his greatest enemy. The giants gave their champion a colossal clay giant as a gift, miles high and long. Meanwhile, the giant himself carried a massive shield and a whetstone the size of a cow. When the two combatants entered the battlefield, they were a fearsome sight. Thor's assistant arrived early and instructed the giant not to hold the shield in front of him. Following the advice, the giant placed the shield beneath his feet. As the sky darkened and lightning flashed, Thor descended from the clouds with a mighty crack of thunder, causing the giant to tremble in fear. Thor hurled his hammer at the giant, who retaliated by throwing the whetstone at Thor. As the two objects met in midair, the whetstone shattered into pieces, with one fragment exploding the giant's skull. Another piece struck Thor's forehead and lodged there. Even worse, a piece of the giant's leg fell on Thor's neck, pinning him to the ground. Thor's assistant rushed to the clay giant and tried to free Thor by removing the leg, but without success. The gods hurried to Thor's aid, but no one could remove the stone or lift the leg until Thor's son, Magni, arrived. Though born just 3 days earlier, the baby boy was strong enough to pull the leg off Thor's neck. Overjoyed, Thor gifted Magni the giant's horse. However, the whetstone remained lodged in Thor's forehead despite attempts to have it removed by a sorceress, who unfortunately forgot the words to her charm. Thus, the stone stayed embedded in his forehead, causing him pain whenever a similar stone was thrown across the floor. Thor had triumphed over the giant in a test of strength, but his next adversary would prove to be far more dangerous, as this foe would battle with his mind. Thor and Loki were traveling far from Asgard when night fell, and they sought refuge in the home of a farmer. Thor offered his goats for dinner, fully aware that they would be revived the next day. Before the meal, he laid the goats' hides on the floor and instructed the family to place the bones on the hides after eating. The farmer had 2 children, and despite Thor's instructions, the younger one named Skelfi broke open one of the goat's leg bones to suck out the marrow before placing it on the hide with the others. Early the next morning, when Thor revived the goats, he discovered that one of them had a crippled leg. Furious, Thor's rage awakened the entire household. He would have slain the entire family on the spot if the farmer had not offered his children as servants. Thor grudgingly accepted, and so he, the 2 children, and Loki continued their journey to Jotunheim on foot. When night fell again, the group arrived at a massive hall. Finding no one inside, they decided to sleep there. Suddenly, they were jolted awake by a tremendous earthquake. Panicked, they ran outside to find a giant sleeping nearby, his snores causing the earth to tremble. Thor, gripping his hammer, prepared to strike the giant, but the giant awoke. Amused rather than threatened, the giant introduced himself as Skrymir and claimed he already knew who they were. He then picked up the haul, which was actually his glove, and offered to accompany them. Though initially fearful, the group reluctantly agreed, recognizing the benefit of having a native guide through Jotunheim. That night, they slept beneath a giant oak tree. Skrymir fell asleep first, but he was carrying all their provisions in his bag. Thor struggled to untie the knots in the bag and, in frustration, struck the sleeping giant on the head with his hammer, intending to destroy him. Skrymir awoke and calmly asked if a leaf had fallen on his head. Later that night, Skrymir's snores grew so loud they echoed like thunder. Thor, enraged, tried again to slay the giant, only for Skrymir to wake up and ask if an acorn had fallen on him. Just before dawn, Thor attempted once more to destroy the giant, who then asked if some birds had roosted above him and shaken dirt onto his face. Skrymir then parted ways with the group, and they continued towards a distant castle known as Utgard. By noon, they reached the castle, but the gate was locked. Loki quickly figured out that the giant's bars were wide enough to slip through. Once inside, they found a hall filled with men feasting and drinking. Their host, King Utgard Loki, mocked them for their small size. Loki quickly boasted that despite their size, no one in the castle could eat faster than he could. Utgard Loki challenged Loki to an eating contest against one of his men, named Loki, whose name meant fire. A trough of meat was set between them, and both began to eat. Though Loki reached the middle at the same time as Loki, the giant had consumed not just the meat but the bones and even the trough itself. Defeated, Loki stated that while he lost the eating contest, no one in the hall could run faster than he could. Utgard Loki then appointed his man, Hugi, whose name meant thought, to race against Loki. Hugi finished so far ahead that he turned around and doubled back to meet his opponent. Thor then boasted that while Loki had lost the eating contest and Skelfi had lost the race, no one in the 9 realms could outdrink him. Utgard Loki had a drinking horn brought out, informing Thor that anyone who could finish it in 1 draft was a great drinker, in 2 drafts was acceptable, and anyone who couldn't finish it in 3 was unimpressive. Thor drank and drank, but by the time he paused, the liquor level had barely moved. He tried again, straining to drink as much as possible, but again fell short. On his 3rd attempt, he poured everything he had into it, but still over half the drink remained. Finally, Utgard Loki offered Thor one last chance. If he could lift his cat from the floor, he would be deemed strong. Thor tried but failed. Enraged, he challenged anyone in the castle to wrestle him. Utgard Loki appointed an old woman, named Ellie, whose name meant age, to fight him. Thor struggled but was unable to defeat her. The group spent the night in the castle, and in the morning, they left, humiliated by their losses. Once outside, Utgard Loki revealed the truth. The knot on the provision bag Thor had struggled with was made of iron, and magic had deflected Thor's hammer blows. Had Thor struck the giant, he would have been killed instantly. The eating contest had been against fire itself, Loki's race had been against thought, the drinking horn had been connected to the sea, the cat was the Midgard serpent, and the wrestling match had been with old age. Utgard Loki then told them to leave and never return. Infuriated, Thor raised his hammer to destroy the giant in his castle, but when he turned to do so, he found no giant or castle, only a vast, empty plain. Thor and Loki narrowly escaped their previous predicament, but their next adventure brought them into a perilous situation. Odin, Loki, and Hönir were traveling through Midgard, following the course of a river. They soon came upon a waterfall, where an otter was enjoying a salmon. Loki, displaying his skill, hurled a rock and struck the otter, boasting of his catch. As night fell, the trio sought shelter at a nearby farmer's home, offering the otter and salmon as a token of gratitude. However, the farmer's reaction was far from welcoming. Upon seeing the otter, he cried out in fury, summoning his sons. He accused the travelers of having slain his 3rd son, who could transform into an otter. The farmer and his sons bound the gods, determined to hold them accountable. Odin quickly proposed a deal to spare their lives. If the farmer and his family received a sufficient amount of gold, they would be set free. The farmer, named Hreidmar, agreed but demanded that the gold be enough to cover the otter's hide. Loki was dispatched to the land of the dwarves to procure the gold. Loki sought out a dwarf named Andvari, who was disguised as a fish. Andvari, frightened, led Loki to his treasure and handed over the gold, but attempted to keep a single ring for himself. Loki insisted on receiving all the gold and, after retrieving the ring, placed a curse on it, ensuring it would bring death to its owner. With the gold in hand, Loki and his companions returned to the farmer. Odin, noticing an especially fine ring among the gold, discreetly pocketed it. He then presented the gold-covered otter hide to Hreidmar. The farmer, however, insisted that one whisker remained uncovered and demanded more gold to complete the restitution. Reluctantly, Odin used the ring he had taken to cover the last whisker. Once freed, Loki gleefully informed Hreidmar of the curse on the ring before the group returned to Asgard. Back at home, Hreidmar's sons, Regin and Fafnir, sought a share of the gold, claiming it was their brother's due. Hreidmar, unwilling to part with any of the treasure, was slain by his enraged sons. Fafnir fled with the gold, hiding it in a cave and transforming into a fearsome dragon to guard his hoard, lying atop it day and night. Odin, Loki, and Hönir were once again on a journey, traversing a barren, mountainous region. Food was scarce, and the trio grew increasingly hungry. Eventually, they came across a valley below them, teeming with oxen grazing. After catching and cooking an ox, they eagerly pulled the meat from the fire, only to find it remained as cold and raw as when they started. They tried cooking it again, but the result was the same. As they debated why the meat was not cooking, a voice called down from above. It claimed responsibility for rendering their fire useless and proposed a deal: if they gave it a share of the meat, it would lift the enchantment and allow their fire to cook the meat. The gods agreed, and once the meat was cooked, the mysterious figure, an eagle, took the best portions for itself. Loki, infuriated by the eagle's greed, attempted to strike the bird. As his branch hit the eagle's back, Loki was lifted off the ground and carried away by the bird. The eagle soared across the landscape, dragging Loki through trees, boulders, and mountains. As Loki felt his body being torn apart, he pleaded with the eagle to release him. The eagle, however, only laughed and eventually proposed a condition for Loki's release. The eagle revealed itself to be the giant, Thjatsi. Thjatsi demanded that Loki swear an oath to bring him both the goddess Idun and her apples, which granted the gods eternal youth. Loki agreed, and Thjatsi set him down. Returning to Asgard, Loki tricked Idun into believing he had found a grove outside the city walls with even more wondrous fruit. Skeptical but intrigued, Idun agreed to accompany Loki to compare the fruits. Once they were far from Asgard, Thjatsi swooped in and seized Idun, carrying her away to his icy home in Thrymheim, a desolate region in Jotunheim. With Idun and her apples gone, the gods began to age rapidly. Their skin wrinkled, their hair turned white, and their bodies grew frail and sickly. They held an urgent council and realized that Idun had last been seen with Loki. Mortified, they summoned Loki and threatened him with a slow and painful death if he did not return Idun and her apples. Terrified, Loki agreed to find Idun, but first, he needed something from them. Freya, distressed by her fading beauty, owned a set of hawk wings that allowed the wearer to transform into a hawk. Loki requested these wings, and Freya granted his wish. In his hawk form, Loki flew to Thrymheim, where he found Idun alone in Thjatsi's home. He transformed her into a nut, took her in his talons, and began his journey back to Asgard. When Thjatsi realized what had happened, he set off in pursuit. Seeing Loki flying towards Asgard with Thjatsi hot on his trail, the gods spread sawdust and kindling along their walls. As Loki crossed their borders, they ignited the fuel, creating massive flames. Thjatsi, unable to stop in time, crashed into the blazing fire and fell to the ground. Upon arriving in Asgard, Loki was greeted with cheers as the gods, rejuvenated by Idun's apples, gathered around and dealt with Thjatsi. Thus, youth and Idun were restored to Asgard once more. While the gods were celebrating the death of Thjatsi with a grand feast, a new figure burst into the hall. Skadi, the giantess and daughter of the slain Thjatsi, had arrived seeking revenge for her father's death. However, the gods greeted her warmly and, after extended negotiations, Skadi agreed to accept compensation rather than exact revenge. The terms of the compensation were as follows: first, Odin would take Thjatsi's eyes and place them in the night sky as stars. Second, the gods had to make Skadi laugh. Despite their best efforts, they failed to amuse her until Loki engaged in a tug-of-war contest with a goat, tying the rope around the animal's midsection. This unusual spectacle was enough to make Skadi giggle. The final part of the compensation was that Skadi would be allowed to choose a god to marry, but she could only select him by looking at his legs and feet. Skadi chose the pair of legs she found most beautiful, believing them to belong to Balder. However, they actually belonged to the sea god Njord. Njord and Skadi were soon married, and their wedding feast was magnificent. Afterward, they had to decide where to live. Tensions arose between them because their preferred homes were starkly different. Njord's homeland, Noten, was a bright and warm land known as the place of ships, while Thrymheim, Skadi's home, was dark, cold, and perpetually snow-covered. The couple initially spent 9 nights in Thrymheim, but Njord found the place unbearable, disliking the howling wolves that replaced the gentle swans he was used to. Conversely, Skadi found Noten equally detestable, disturbed by the cries of the seabirds that kept her awake. After 9 nights, she declared that she could not tolerate the new land and decided to return to the mountains, leaving her husband. The marriage of Njord and Skadi would be one of the last joyful events in Norse mythology, as the stories that followed took a darker turn. Balder, one of Odin's sons, was also the most beloved of all the gods. One night, he began experiencing dreadful and ominous nightmares. Disturbed by these visions, he shared his plight with the other gods, who quickly assembled a council to determine the best course of action. The gods realized they needed to understand the meaning behind Balder's nightmares before deciding what to do. Consequently, Odin was dispatched to uncover the source of his son's troubling dreams. The All-Father journeyed across the world tree Yggdrasil, traveling to its roots in the land of the dead. Upon arrival, Odin encountered the fierce guardian dog at the entrance, which barked angrily at him. Fortunately, Odin was familiar with this journey and knew how to appease the guardian. He proceeded to the Hall of Hel, the death goddess, where he found the hall prepared with many tables, as though for a grand feast. Ignoring the tables, Odin approached the grave of a powerful sorceress. He used his magic to awaken her, allowing her to sit up and speak. In a trance, she spoke. "I have been dead for so long, enduring rain, snow, and decay. Yet now, a stranger has awakened me. Who are you?" Odin introduced himself as Vegtam, the traveler, and inquired about the preparations in the hall. The sorceress revealed that the feast was in honor of Balder, whose arrival was being celebrated, even as the gods mourned his future death. "I have shared more than I intended," the sorceress continued. "It is time for me to return to my slumber." "Please, stay awake a little longer," Odin pleaded. "Who will bring about Balder's death?" The sorceress replied cryptically, "It will be someone with a slender branch that will soon become famous." "Before you go," Odin pressed, "please tell me more." The sorceress recognized Odin as the old necromancer and said, "Go home. I will answer no more questions. No one shall receive another answer from me until Loki breaks free from his bonds at the giants' meeting during Ragnarok." With that, the sorceress fell silent, and Odin returned to the world above, deeply troubled by the revelations and the ominous future awaiting his son Balder. Despite knowing of Balder's destined fate, the gods refused to accept it. Freyja, Balder's mother, made a desperate effort to protect her son. She went to every being in the universe, every animal, plant, element, disease, and more, and made them swear solemn oaths never to harm her son in any way. The gods celebrated, believing they had thwarted the prophecy and defeated fate itself. They began to throw various objects at Balder, delighted to see that axes, swords, arrows, and stones merely bounced off him without causing a single wound. However, Loki, always the trickster, had a devious plan. Disguised as an ordinary woman, he approached Freyja and asked if there was any object in the universe from which she had not secured an oath. Freyja confessed that she had not asked the mistletoe, considering it too small and weak to pose any threat to Balder. Seizing this opportunity, Loki crafted a spear from the mistletoe that grew in Valhalla. The next day, as the gods continued their game of throwing objects at Balder, Loki found Hod, Balder's blind brother, standing apart from the others. Loki, feigning concern, remarked on how improper it was for Hod to miss the chance to honor Balder by participating in the demonstration of his invincibility. He handed Hod the mistletoe spear and guided him on where to throw it. The spear struck Balder and he fell, lifeless. The gods were devastated, and Odin especially mourned the loss of his son. He realized that this was a clear sign that no one could escape fate, and that when Ragnarok arrived, all the gods would face the same end as Balder. Odin, deeply troubled, prayed for someone to venture into the underworld to negotiate Balder's release. He promised eternal esteem and love to anyone who would undertake this perilous mission. Hermod, Balder's brother, stepped forward and volunteered. Odin granted him the use of his 8-legged horse, and Hermod set off for the realm of the dead. Balder's funeral was a grand affair. His body was placed on a massive ship, set ablaze, and sent out to sea. Thor lit the fire, and Odin cast his ring into the flames. As gods, elves, dwarves, and even giants looked on, the fire consumed the ship, which sank beneath the waves. Once the boat had disappeared, the waters and air became eerily still. Meanwhile, Hermod rode through the underworld for 9 nights, navigating through increasingly dark and foreboding valleys until he could see nothing at all. In the pitch darkness, he glimpsed a glint of gold and came upon a golden bridge spanning the river Joel, which encircled the underworld. A fearsome guardian stood before the bridge, questioning Hermod's presence and noting that the bridge had held up under many armies of the dead but seemed to shake at his crossing. Hermod explained that he sought Balder. The guardian, recognizing Hermod's earnest mission, allowed him to pass. On the other side, Hermod found the closed gates of hell, but he managed to leap over them into the fields of the underworld. He proceeded to Hel's high hall, where Balder sat beside the goddess Hel. Hermod begged Hel to release his brother, explaining how every creature in the universe mourned Balder's absence. Hel listened and then responded, "You claim that all beings weep for Balder. I will test this assertion. If you can make every last creature in the cosmos cry for Balder, I will allow him to return to the world of the living. But if even one stone, flea, or blade of grass withholds its tears, then Balder shall remain with me." Hermod agreed to these terms and thanked Hel for her mercy. Upon returning to Asgard, the gods made a concerted effort to ensure that every being, from elves and dwarves to humans, plants, mountains, rivers, and stars, was mourning Balder. However, they soon discovered a lone giantess named Thok in a cave, whose eyes remained dry. She scornfully declared, "I never cared for that fellow. Let Hel keep what she has." Many believe that Thok was actually Loki in disguise, and this is likely true. As a result, Balder remained in the realm of the dead until the events of Ragnarok. The sea giant Aegir, who had always been on good terms with the gods of Asgard, invited them all to a grand feast in his hall. All the gods and elves attended, except for Thor, who was preoccupied with slaying giants. Upon arrival, the guests were greeted by Aegir's servants, Elder and Fema Fawn. The ale flowed freely, and everyone was pleased, praising Aegir's servants as among the best in the 9 realms. This attention to the servants made Loki envious. When Fema Fawn came near him, Loki drew his sword and struck him down on the spot. The gods erupted in anger at Loki's action, and they chased him out of the hall and into the forest. After some time brooding in the woods, Loki resolved to return to the hall. He grabbed the servant Elder by the arm and demanded to know what the guests were discussing. "Tell me, Elder," Loki demanded, "what are the guests talking about now? Answer me or I'll ensure you never take another step." "They're talking about their war victories and their marvelous weapons," Elder replied. "If I were you, Loki, I wouldn't go back in there. You'll find no one inclined to be friendly towards you." "I'm going in anyway," Loki declared. The gods deserve to have their drinks poisoned and their boats ruined. He shoved the servant aside and stormed back into the hall. The guests turned to watch him enter. Loki announced, "I'm thirsty after my long journey. Someone pour me a drink." Bragi, the god of poetry, spoke up, "The gods know who they want at their feasts and who they don't. You've had your chance before, but no longer. Don't you remember, Odin? We once mixed our blood together, and you promised you'd never drink alcohol unless we drank together," Loki taunted. "Give me what I want, or I'll speak ill of you." Odin retorted, "You've never been rich enough in horses, swords, or rings to make such offers. Perhaps you'd be richer if you had shown some bravery in battle. If it weren't for the fact that we're guests in another's hall, I'd pay you the price you deserve for your lies by taking your head right here and now. Consider how closely related you are to the other gods," Loki sneered. "Stop your rash chatter, Odin. You meddle in battles but never award victory justly. You grant triumph to the strong and defeat to the weak." Freya interrupted, "You're not one to talk. Remember that you once wrapped your arms around the man who killed your own brother. Your wisdom is questionable." Loki shot back, "And you, Freya, slept with Vali while your husband was away. If my son Balder were here, you wouldn't leave this hall alive. Is that so?" Freya said coldly. "You prevented him from coming. If a woman has an affair now and then, it's no marvel, but it's surprising to hear such a taunt from a man who fathered children of his own." Thok, the giantess, added, "You once let a giant use your mouth as a latrine, and you'll howl and rattle your chains like Fenrir for millennia unless you learn to control your tongue." Loki retorted, "The only way you could get a wife was by buying her from her father with gold. When the fire giants come from Muspelheim to destroy your world, you'll be helpless against them. Enjoy your freedom while it lasts, because soon the gods will bind you with chains made from the bowels of your own son, whose body will be as cold as ice." Loki continued, "Perhaps so, but the last sight your father, Thiazi, ever saw was me slaying him. Surely that's Thor returning from his journey. He won't tolerate your slimy insults for long. Keep your mouth shut, or I'll close it for you with my hammer and rip your neck from your shoulders." Thor, hearing this, said, "Why treat me so coarsely? Save your energy for fighting the great serpent at Ragnarok. If you continue insulting me, I'll throw your helpless body to the giants and let them decide your fate." Loki conceded, "Everything I've said is true, but I'm no match for Thor. I will stop speaking my mind and leave this splendid hall. Aegir, your feasts and ale have lived up to their reputation. Enjoy them while you can, for soon the flames of Ragnarok will consume your hall and your body." With that, Loki fled, pursued by the furious gods. Loki fled as quickly as he could, eventually losing his pursuers in the vast wilderness. He made his way to a remote mountain where he built a house with 4 doors, allowing him to keep watch over the land below from all directions. When the fear of being found by the gods became too great, he would transform into a salmon and hide beneath a waterfall in a nearby stream. Loki managed to evade capture for many months, but eventually, the day he dreaded arrived. While Loki was weaving a new fishing net, he noticed a group of people approaching. In a panic, he threw the net into the fire and vanished from the house. When the gods arrived, it was the wise god Vidar who noticed the remnants of the net in the fire. After examining it, he realized it must have been used for fishing and decided to make a new net that resembled the first. Once the new net was ready, the gods took it to the stream and cast it into the waterfall. Loki, in his salmon form, narrowly avoided the net. The gods, determined to catch him, weighted the net down further to ensure it would trap everything at the bottom of the stream. Despite his best efforts, Loki was caught as he tried to escape to the open ocean. Thor seized him mid-flight, holding him firmly by the tail. Loki wriggled desperately, but Thor's grip was unyielding, leaving the salmon with a tapered back, a mark it still bears to this day. The gods brought Loki to a cave, where they presented 2 of his sons. Loki was forced to watch as one son was transformed into a wolf, who then savagely tore apart the other son. Afterward, the entrails of the dead son were used to bind Loki to the rocks in the cave. Skath, the daughter of the giant Jotzi, approached Loki with a massive viper. "This is your payment for killing my father Jotzi," she declared. She positioned the serpent above Loki so that its venom would drip onto his forehead every time Loki cried out in pain. The serpent's movements caused the earth to tremble. Loki's only mercy was that his wife, Sigyn, was allowed to hold a bowl over his head to catch the venom. However, whenever the bowl filled up and she had to leave the cave to empty it, a few drops of venom would inevitably fall on Loki's head, causing him to shriek in agony. This constant torment was the source of all earthquakes. Loki remained trapped in that cave, enduring his suffering until the end of days. One day, perhaps tomorrow, next year, or even a millennium from now, the Dark Age will come to pass. The countless warriors Odin has assembled in Valhalla will emerge from their hall to face their fate. The tension between the giants and the gods will finally reach a breaking point, and the cosmos itself will hold its breath. The first sign of Ragnarok will be the onset of Thimbleweather, a series of 3 terrible winters with no summer in between. Darkness, snow, ice, and wind will cover the earth, and the sun's rays will barely touch the surface. Brothers, fathers, and sons will turn against each other in this dark age, until every shield on earth lies shattered. The wolves, who have pursued the sun and moon for countless years, will finally catch them and devour both sources of light, plunging the world into eternal darkness. Earthquakes will shake each of the 9 realms, and Yggdrasil itself will tremble. Heimdall will surely blow his horn to warn the gods of the impending disaster. Odin will desperately consult Mimir's severed head, hoping against hope for a solution, though he will not like the answer he receives. Then, the monsters whom the gods have struggled to contain will break free from their bonds. Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, will rise from the ocean, displacing so much water that it will be impossible to distinguish where the land ends and the ocean begins. Fenrir will finally break his chains and run furiously across the earth, consuming everything in his path. A ship, constructed from the fingernails of the dead, will be released from the ocean's depths. The gods will recoil in terror as the giants man its countless oars and helm, led by Loki himself. The fire giants will arrive from Muspelheim, with Surtur leading them, swinging his flaming sword, which shines brighter than the sun. As they cross the Bifrost Bridge, it will snap and crumble under their weight. The giants will sack and pillage Asgard, forcing the gods to flee their home. Finally, all will converge on the plains of Vigrid, the battleground. On one side will stand the giants, Fenrir, Jormungandr, and Loki. On the other side will be the gods and the warriors of Valhalla. Odin will strike first, charging into battle on his 8-legged horse against Fenrir. The wolf will devour the All-Father whole. Odin's son will then confront Fenrir, tearing the beast's jaws apart, but Thor, who would have sought vengeance, will be too occupied battling Jormungandr. Their fight will rage across the plains, filled with lightning, thunder, and venom. Though Thor will eventually slay the serpent, he will succumb to its poison, taking only 9 steps before collapsing dead. The loyal Vidar will face Loki, the most disloyal, and both will be slain in their battle. Tyr, Surtur, and all other gods and giants will perish. As Surtur's fire engulfs the world, with no gods left to uphold it, the earth will sink into the sea. The silence, stillness, and emptiness of Ginnungagap will return, reigning forever.